Okay, howdy everybody. I'm Blaine Carter. You've probably seen me once or twice before. With me is Amit, and he is going to show us some really cool stuff today. Just a heads up for the session for next month. We are moving it ahead a few days, and we're going to have it a little bit earlier in the day. It will be a session on the new features coming out for Visual Builder, Visual Builder Studio in the next release, and some really good stuff in there. So double check the calendar on the site that you got the link from to join the session. Double check that for next month, and you'll see when the new date and time is. I was messing around with the settings for this session and next session. So if I don't know when it sends out emails, but if you got like 9,000 emails because I changed and saved and changed and saved, I apologize for that. Hopefully it's smart enough to only send you the one email, but I didn't write it, so it's not my fault. Well, it is my fault. I pushed the button. But anyway, if you got 1,000 emails, I apologize. So, and one last thing is coming up in October. We are going to have another Oracle Cloud World, and anybody who's going to attend there, I well, I'll know tomorrow for sure that I'm attending, but I can't imagine they'll tell me no. But we will be doing the hands-on lab 3 times this year, and I'll have a couple talks, and other members on the team will have a couple talks. So if you're going to be there, stop by. We'll have a booth in the demo center, and stop by there and say hi. Other than that, I think I've blah blahed on enough, and I will turn it over to Amit. I'm going to drop off, and I will answer questions in the background, or at least I'll try. All right.
Thank you, Glenn. Thank you for the nice intro. Thank you. Let me just share my screen. Please let me know if my screen is visible.
Yeah, I can see it.
Right? Sure, thank you. Let me go to the presentation mode. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining the session. My name is Amit, and I work as a PaaS lead for Oracle CSS GSC Tech Cloud Digital Team. And in today's session, we'll deep dive into the Visual Builder request and the response transformation function. We'll basically see how we can grasp any REST API, no matter it's built in uh, like ORDS or OIC or Node or any REST API. We'll see how we can write a custom transformation function in Visual Builder to integrate with our out-of-the-box feature that is available for us in Visual Builder for pagination, sorting, filtering, and so on, right? And when covering these concepts, we'll also see some of the related topics as well. I'll just try to cover some of the topics related to the SDP and so on, right? So let's get started. So for agenda, we'll see what are the service data providers, right? And we'll have a quick demo on the out-of-the-box features that SDB provides when we use Visual Builder Business Object or the Fusion REST API, and then we get the out-of-the-box filtering, pagination, and so on. And now the same out-of-the-box features that we see here, we'll try to implement the same when we integrate with any other APIs. For example, just for this demo, I have created a REST API in Node.js. So we'll see how we can write the custom transformation function for the custom REST API that I have developed specifically for this session, right? So with that, we'll cover how we'll write the request and the response transformation function. So let's get started. So in Visual Builder, we basically see data providers, right? Maybe it's service data providers, array data providers. We also have the multi-service data providers and so on, right? So data providers, it basically help us to integrate with the REST APIs. Like it basically help us to connect the UI components with the REST APIs, right? And it can help with the data retrieval, management, And as I mentioned, it's basically integrating the UI components with the backend systems. And typically, there are two types of primary types of data providers. One is the service data provider. One is the array data provider. We also have a legacy array data provider that we do not use now. And there is one more variant of the service data provider that is called as the multi-service data provider. Uh, maybe maybe when I speak about SDP, I can also cover about that as well, about the multi-service data provider. And because we need to understand we need to discuss on a couple of concepts here before we try to see the actual difference that what is between SDP and MSDP, right? So let's get started and let's see some of the concepts related to SDP. So when we create SDP in Visual Builder, right, either dragging and dropping from the component palette, the data palette, or even when we create the SDP variable manually, what we see is like we need to attach it to a REST endpoint, the service endpoint, right? So SDP, what it does is like whenever an SDP is attached to a UI component, and that UI component is displayed on the browser, right? That maybe so basically SDP are bound to tables, list, and so on. And when the table, list, or the select LOV component are displayed in the browser, SDP will implicitly call the REST API attached to it, right? And it will invoke the REST API. It will try to fetch the data. It will fetch the data, right? So this is the implicit call which we discussed just now. So apart from the implicit call, we also have an option in SDP to delegate this call to the REST API via an action chain. And there are a number of use cases that maybe sometimes we need to delegate it to an action chain, right? So during the demo, I can just cover one of the use case, right? When we have to do it, one real time use case when we have to delegate the SDP call via an action chain, right? And also in SDP, we have multiple properties. Okay, so in the next slide, we'll see the list of some of the important properties that are available in SDP, and I'll try to discuss in detail some of the important properties that we have. So basically, what happens in SDP, right? Suppose we might have already used, right, in SDP a filter criteria. So in an SDP, if we use a filter criteria and if we map that object to any variable, maybe a filter variable that we create in our VB. So whenever there is any change to the variable, then what happens is there is an internal event that will be fired in an SDP, right? And SDP will then try to invoke the API. It means the API that is attached to, that is inbound to the SDP. So any change that happens to any of the SDP properties will invoke the API, right? Will invoke the API that is tied to the SDP. And then when the API is invoked, then whichever the UI components that are bound to SDP, what we call is the subscribers. Maybe I have a SDP, right? Maybe sales order SDP. That SDP is bound to table. That SDP is also bound to a select single. So whenever any changes happen to SDP, my table and my select single, everything will get refreshed, correct? Because all the components that are bound to the SDP are subscribed to it. So any changes happen, then it will change accordingly. Right? And also in SDP, correct, we get some very pretty cool features such as filtering, sorting, pagination. There's something called as fetching by keys, right? We can also customize which fields that we want from the REST API if the REST API supports it, right? Instead of sending 10 fields, I just want a couple of fields from the REST API. So all these things we can customize in our SDP if we are not using the business object endpoints, REST endpoint, VB business object REST endpoints. If we are using some third-party REST endpoints, then we can customize this all sorts, right? So that's what I mentioned that for VB Business Object or for Fusion APIs, these all features are provided out of the box. And for other REST endpoints, we need to implement the custom transformation function, which we'll see in detail in this section, how to implement the same. As I was saying that we'll discuss some of the basic or common or the important features of the SDP, which will help us to understand more what an SDP is and how we can leverage it or how we can utilize all the features that is available by SDP, right? So this is a basic endpoint. This is, as I was saying, right, SDP is attached to a uh, API, basically the REST API. And most of the times it will be GET API. We can also have POST. We can also have a POST API. This is a corner case. If we use POST API, maybe in some scenarios, we have to customize the body that we need to send it. But 99.9% time, it will be a GET endpoint, right, in an SDP. The key attributes, right? So whenever we drag any API or any endpoint to our or whenever we attach any endpoint to our UI components, we need to provide a key attribute. So in case of table, if we are displaying the data in a table, then uh, either ID or maybe some set of keys, right? Maybe composite keys will be our key attributes, which help us to work with the data in our UI. So the key attributes either can be a single key, as I was saying, it can be an ID, or it can be composite keys as well. In that case, it would be an array of columns, right? Items path. So suppose let's say we are having a endpoint and which gives us data in kind of a nested object. Maybe count, it will have some more additional properties. And finally, it will have this collection, that means the array. And this property name is result. In case of ORDS or in case of Fusion, it is called as items, right? But in case of other some third-party API, I might have given the property name as result. So in this items path, I need to point to the collection that is coming from my response. So in this case, it will be result, right? Response type. So it's a good practice that we give the schema. That means the response type to the SDP. There is one important reason for this is, suppose, uh, let's take an example of a Fusion API, right? So in Fusion API, if I have to fetch the sales order details or the item details, it will give me around it has around 50 attributes or 40 attributes, right? But I only need couple of them, right? So what I can do is if I give this response type, right, just with couple of attributes, the schema, then in that case, implicitly from an SDP, there will be something called as fields properties will be passed. So only those couple of attributes which we have given in our response type will be passed as a in the API call as a fields properties, and then Fusion API is built in such a way that it will only return those two columns, right? So this is the reason it's suggested if the backend API supports uh, selecting which fields we want to fetch, it's suggested to have this response type property. It's a good practice, right? There are a couple of more things, the capabilities in an SDP in an SDP. So this capabilities is basically hint for my UI component. Suppose, and this is more mostly it's there are multiple type of capabilities such as fetch first, fetch by keys, fetch by object. This is more related to a select single component, right? And when I say fetch first, right, this is the default value of this property capability. So what happens is, let's assume if I have a yeah, if I have a select single component, right, and this component is displayed in my browser, then what happens is, like, whenever I try to click on this component, then the default capabilities, that means the fetch first capabilities will be triggered. What this will do is this will invoke the get endpoint that is attached to my SDP, and it will try to fetch the data which I need for this LOP. Right? This is one case. The second case called is fetch by keys. What is the difference between these two? Let's say this is one scenario, right? The selects, and let's say there is one more scenario, maybe I want to go to an edit page. So in case of edit page, which I have saved earlier, I already might have selected the value from this LOB, right? Maybe the department name. So the value of this LOB, is already available to me when I come to this page. So in that case, what I need to see, suppose I have stored the value of department ID, right, in my DB. But now I want to display the department name as a label in this LOB. So what I can do is, or what SDP will do internally is, it will see the value property when I come to when I come to the edit page. What SDP will do is, it will see, okay, this ID properties is already passed to this select single data, right? Then in that case, SDP will internally, instead of calling fetch first, what it will do is it will invoke fetch by keys. It will use this fetch by keys capabilities of the SDP. And in that case, it will pass the ID property, which is mapped to this value of the select single. And in that case, uh, it will just return one single record from the DB, right? So this is what the fetch by keys and fetch first means. And let me just quickly, as I was saying, right, there is one more uh, uh, data providers apart from SDP. There's something called a multi-data provider, right? Multi-service data provider. So in that case, so what happens here is like, as I was giving this example, right, the select single. So in most of the scenario, like for the Visual Builder business object or some REST endpoints, right? So get single or get many. Suppose if I have get many endpoint, right, to REST API. So I'm getting all the data. And if I have to pass some single, if I need to fetch some single value, then there are two things. Either I'll have a different get API, right, where I can pass some maybe ID as a path parameter. Or in this get many API itself, what I can do is I can pass a query parameter. Query parameter ID equals to some value, right? So if the fetch first and fetch by keys, if it can use a single API, right? Because the API supports that. API supports using the ID parameter, and with the ID parameter, I can just get one single value. If fetch by keys and fetch first supports means if it can leverage a single API, then SDP will work fine in this case. Okay, but there might be a scenario that for get many, right, we do not have the capabilities to pass ID as a query parameter. Okay, it only supports some other parameters, but ID, the primary key, we cannot pass as a query parameter. So in that case, this get many API cannot use this fetch by keys property. Then what will happen is we need to attach one more endpoint to it, right? And that second endpoint will support this ID property, which I can pass. Now, since we'll have two endpoints, so what will happen is we have to create a new type of variable called as multi-service data provider, right? Inside this multi-service data provider, we'll have the reference to these two SDPs. And then this component will smartly decide when to use fetch first and when to use fetch by keys. I'll just given some basic understanding of what is this multi-service data provider. But this is the main difference that we have to decide when we have to use one, right? And finally, the transform, right? This is also one of the properties in SDP, and transform has couple of transform has an this transform itself is an object which has this request and the response functions. Like this is itself an object. Inside this object, we can write multiple functions such as filter, sort, page, and so on. Okay. And if I see the request transformation function, I have just provided a couple of common ones that we will be customizing it, right? Like filter, sort, page, fetch by keys. And for response, we just have to paginate and body. So filter, as we know, if we write a custom transformation function, it will filter the data, sorting, and this is some type of mistake. This is also called as paginate. So paginate, it is both at the request and the response. I'll say what is the difference between these two, right? And there is something called as fetch by keys, which we have already discussed now. In the response, we have paginate and body. So body is something like, so suppose if we get some response from the API, right? And in that response, we want to customize the response before sending it back to the UI component or before it is displayed in the UI component. So what I can do is maybe I can give you an example like for my application, I specifically follow one particular date format. Correct? So in that case, what I can do is whenever I get a response from any API, right? I can write one single transformation function for the body. I can just check if the data is date type. Then I can customize that date to display in a particular format. Then I don't have to do any other customization in any place in my UI. Okay? So this is what the body function will help me. Paginate. Okay, this we'll see in detail in our demo, but I'll just quickly explain. What paginate will do is like if we have more number of rows to fetch, right? Like in my table, I'm displaying 25 records. But if I need to fetch more number of rows, so I'll scroll down. Right? So SDP needs to keep keep track of if there are more number of rows available in my endpoint or not. Right? So this paginate property or this paginate function will help us to write a custom code which will help SDP to track it. We'll see in detail. We'll write the code and we'll see in detail how this helps us. Let me quickly give a demo on the business object REST endpoints, and let me show it to you how these all features are available out of the box in SDP, right? Using SDP. Hope my screen is visible. I'm sharing my VB instance. I'll create a web application. I have a business object. Mostly we'll use this employees one. And this is based on the Oracle HR schema. The data is based on the Oracle HR schema. And in this, let me quickly show it to you. Let me just create a table with this employees business object, right? With get many API. I can just go to this table. I just wanted to show a couple of points that we have discussed here. Okay? So let me select few columns, maybe first name, yeah, department ID, and so on. ID is the primary key, right? I'll just click on finish. Let me give a height to the table. Let me just try to run this. And if we see now, right, uh, if I try to scroll down, next set of records will be fetched, right? And I was saying about the fields property. If you observe here, SDP is internally taking care of which fields I want to populate. So maybe this business object has around 20 fields, but I'm only interested in the email, first name, and department ID, right? So since I have given the response type, I was saying, right, why we need to give a response type to an SDP. So here I have given a response type variable. So if you see here, I've defined it, I've attached a type to my SDP. So in that case, only those fields which I have defined will be fetched from my API. And obviously my API needs to support it. My API needs to understand the REST API, the business object REST API needs to understand if the front end, that means the Visual Builder, passes these fields properties, how do I read these fields and how do I send only the required data from that is needed by the client, right? And as I was saying, right, there are some properties for Visual Builder, like this is items path. In my slide, I have given this as a, I guess, response or maybe some other name. But in the Visual Builder business object, the default or the standard name is the items. So this basically we need to point out to the array that we want to display in our table. Keys attribute, I was saying that we can select multiple keys as well. So if we select multiple values, right, this will be stored as an array, which we, if required, we can use it. We can use it for fetching some data. Right? But remember, if we select multiple, it will be stored as an array. Right? Uh, we also have the default filtering capabilities as well. Right? Let me just quickly show here. Uh, um, this variable filter. What I can do is I can very easily go and assign this, map this filter property to my SDP, right? SDP filter criteria inbuilt property here. I can declaratively define my filter criteria here. So suppose maybe I want to filter based on my department ID, right? I can, and I can map to that variable which I have created here, right? Or maybe I can also map. I can also have filter based on the first name. And it will also point to the same variable that I have created to store the filter value. Sorry, to store the filter criteria. Right? And if I try to run this, I can just put 50. Let's just okay. Sorry, I just missed to. I need to assign this input text here to the variable that we have created. Right. So whatever value that we pass here is mapped to, it will be assigned to this variable. And since this variable is mapped to the SDP, the SDP will get refreshed and it will repaint all the UI component that is attached to it. Right? So if you see all the values where the department ID is 50 is filtered. Similarly, I can also uh, uh, search with the first name, right? So this will work. Even if I search with the first name, if I put some proper data, it will work. Okay. So this is I wanted to quickly show it to you how these are the out of the box feature that is available with SDP. And if we use business object or fusion REST API, we do not have to write any code to transform the request in the response transformation. Right? But we'll see now how, suppose let's say like I'm developing a visual builder application, but my source of data cannot be always business object, right? I need to consume some, or I may have to consume some REST endpoint that is developed by some other team or maybe some other organization, and I need to consume that REST API, and I need to develop my application. So I need to understand the REST API that I'll be consuming. The Visual Builder will be consuming, and accordingly, I need to write the request in the response transformation function. So the first step for us, if we need to have a custom request and response transformation function, is to understand the REST API that we'll be leveraging it. So let me before the demo, let me just quickly there's just one more slide. Let me just give you some points related to the transformation function, right? So as I was saying, right, we have to write custom transformation function when we have to use any third party or API which is not supported out of the box by Visual Builder. I mean, supported means the pagination, these properties are not supported out of the box. Right? So when I say request transformation function, right, what it will do is before sending the request to the REST endpoint, REST API, it will the request transformation function will transform the data. That means it will transform the query parameters in such a way that my target endpoint can understand it, right? It will build a final payload so that my target endpoint can understand and it can do the operation that is intended to. The response transformation function, as I mentioned right earlier, that basically it is used to like add some or amend the response in such a way that I can use some before sending or before displaying to my client, or maybe for example before displaying to the table, I can just transform some data. Maybe I was giving an example of date. I need to display date in some specific format. So before displaying to the table, instead of writing some code for each and every table, what I can do is, or each and every application, what I can do is in my response body itself, I can see if the value is date, then I can just convert it into a particular format that is expected by my application, right? And we can write the transformation function at multiple places. Okay, we can write at the tenancy level. We can write at the service connection level. We can write at the backend level. We can also write the transformation function at the individual SDP level as well, or even at the call REST endpoint action as well. But the recommended approach, means the suggested approach is to write the transformation function at the backend level, right? So that it can be used by all the endpoints of that particular uh, suppose if I have developed 10 endpoints using ORDS, right? So all the endpoints, if I write at the backend level, I don't have to write it for each and every individual APIs. Means all the ORDS endpoints can use the same transformation function. Correct? Yeah. Let's start with this demo, the custom transformation function. So just for this session, what I have done is I have created an API, Node API. The reason for it is for ORDS, we already have a couple of blocks where we have the code. And since ORDS is a standard technology, it defines some specific input parameter, the filter queries, and so on. So what I have done is I have created a Node API, and this Node API, I have defined my own set of query parameters, the values that it is going to return. It's my custom API, right? So let's say I have developed this API, and now this API needs to be consumed in my Visual Builder application. So the first step is we need to understand what this API is doing. What are the various parameters that needs to be passed to the API, right? So once we understand this, we can write the request and the response transformation function in our Visual Builder. Let me just quickly show this API code, right? I'll just take a minute. I'll just show it quickly what my API is doing, and then we'll have a we'll just try to send some request to the postman and see how it behaves, right? So in my API, will accept this start index, limit, queue, fields, and so on, right? So if this start index is in some of the other maybe in ORDS, we instead of start index we call this as offset, right? But in my custom API, I have given the name as start index. So what I'm doing is I'm just checking if there are query parameters. Then I'm filtering it, filtering the data. And for this also I'm using the employees. From the HR schema, I pulled the employees data and I'm using this as a source of data for my node service as well. So I'm just filtering based on the query parameter that is provided. And for my node API, right, I expect the client, that means any client who is consuming my node API should send this filter parameter in this format, right? It should be queue, department ID, and whatever the values of the field. And I expect this should be my filter parameters, right? Similarly, for sending some subset of data, right? So I just need first 25 records, or maybe if I give the start index as 10, right, and limit as 20, then I need to have 20 records starting from index 10, right? So in order to implement that, I have just written a small code which will give me a subset of data. I've also implemented this fields properties, as I was saying, right? If I just need to, if my API by default it gives me all the fields, right? But I just need a couple of fields to be displayed in my VB. So for performance, reason, I can just pass the fields which I need, and my API supports it. But but we need to understand is that the REST API, the API that we are going to use, needs to support all these features. Okay? The sorting, even this Node API supports a sort feature. If does Node API do not support sort features, we cannot write the transformation function in VB. And finally, just keep an eye on these attributes. So apart from this, the response data, right, it will be an array. I also sent a couple of more additional information. Has more. That means uh, on the first go, I'm sending 10 records. Are there more records available? If so, then this has more property will be true. Total means the total number of records that is available. On the first go, I have just sent 10, but there might be around 100 records. So what is the total number of records that is available, right? Count, starting. These are the custom names which I have given. This can be any name. So once I create this API, I can create a document, and this document I can give to the VB developer. They need to write the request in the response transformation function based on my uh, node application, right? Let me just quickly show it in the Postman how my API behaves. Hope my Postman screen is visible, right? If I see this is my API which I have deployed, it will initially it may take a couple of seconds to send the data. Means if I start after if I send a request after a few minutes, it will take some time. This is the reason I have deployed it to some free server. So initially to heat it up, it will take a couple of seconds. So yeah. So I got all the data, right? So as I was saying that I can, what I can do is I can pass only a couple of fields here, right? So in that case, it will just send me email ID and last name. I can pass my query parameters in this way. That is, department ID should be 50 and email should be this, right? Or so I'll just get one single record here, right? So just see here, limit is 25, right? Because my limit value is 25. The default limit value is 25. Start index, default start index is 0. The count means the count of record data. It means the actual response length means the item that I got it, that count. Total, how many records are there? 107. Has more is false because there is no more record available based on this filter criteria, right? So since we understand this is our node API, let us just quickly try to create the connection to this node API and see how we can consume in our Visual Builder. Let me create a new page. And let me create a service connection to basically pass the endpoint back into the node API. So this is the URL that we have just seen now. Okay. So if you see here, I created a service connection, right? And I created a new page here. Let me make that as a default page. So this is a new page which I have created. So let's try to do the same operation that we have done for the business object API, right? So I can very easily go to this data palette. I can drag and drop my node service here. I can select few columns, maybe first name. I can select this hire date, right? Email, and let me select this department ID as well so that I can. Let me give a height to this. Now, if we remember right, when we use our business object based endpoint, correct? So yeah, by default, because this is also an SDP. When I drag and drop this endpoint, this is behind the scene. It created an SDP, and it has linked to my node endpoint, right? Node API, correct? But and whenever this table is visible in the UI, one call will be made to my node API, and it will give me the response. And this response is what displayed in my UI. Now, because if you see here, right, it has just given me 25 records because this is how I have written my node code that by default it should just give me first 25 set of records. If I need to fetch next set of 25 records, I can leverage the paginate option. So if I try to scroll down, right? See, if I'm trying to scroll down, there is no more API call being made. But if we are using the business object based endpoint, this was working fine. When I try to scroll, it has reached the end, then it will make one more API call with the maybe start index as 25. So it will fetch the next set of 25 records. But this is not working in case of our Node API. So that means we need to, because the Node API understand the code that I have written, it understands the the query parameters in a different way compared to the business object. Correct? So what I have to do, I have to write it custom. I have to tell Visual Builder before sending the request to the Node API, use some transformation function so that you are sending the data in a correct format, the query parameters or the required parameters in the correct format. So that's what we'll quickly do it for this Node application as well. So what I can do is I can go to my service endpoints, either at the backend level or at the service connection level. I can create a custom transformation function. Okay. I can select. So these are the request and the response transformation function which is available to us. We'll just be using the important ones like the filter, the paginate, and so on, right? And let me select this. Now, if I go to this file, right? So what Visual Builder will do is Visual Builder will create a structure of this class, the request and the response class, and Visual Builder will fill us some of the blueprint, right? Some of the code, but this code is a generic code. It's kind of just a sample code that Visual Builder is filled us. Now we need to tweak this code to match the endpoint that we are using. So in our case, we are using the node endpoint, right? So if we one of the function that we see here is paginate, and this is a behavior we are trying to implement here, right? If I try to scroll down, I want to fetch next set of data. So let's quickly see the paginate function that Visual Builder has. This is the sample paginate function that is generated for us, right? If I see this sample paginate function, right? What it does is it adds this code for by fetching based on the limit, offset, and so on. But if we see, or if you remember the Node API that we are using here, we are not using offset, right? What we are using here is we are using something called as the start index, correct? So what I can do is limit is fine. We are using limit, right? And then instead of offset, the name that we have given is start index. So I can just change this name here, right? This value will be same because this is the internal to the Visual Builder. So when we use SDP, this value comes from there. Option dot side also comes from there, right? And now when we have to make one more change, as I was saying, right? SDP needs to understand if there are more values that is available in the endpoint, correct? I have made the first fetch, correct? But if I see there are more values that is available, and this more data is coming in the response. So now the next change that we have to make is in the response pagination function. This is the request pagination function. If you see, this is under the request class. There's something called as the response paginate function as well. If I scroll down, this is the response class, and here I see the response paginate function. If I see this function, this is a normal simple JavaScript code that is written. So here we have to make one more change here. So if we see this, right, the variable that the code which Visual Builder has generated for us has something called total count, but our Node API right? It doesn't have total count. The name of the variable here in the case of our Node API is called total, right? So what I have to do is I can just go here and I can change this. Right? And now, based on this as more property will be stored in this SDP properties, right? And now SDP can decide it has to call the API again or not, as we have done the changes in both the request and the response transformation function. So with this change, let's just try to hit the run our code application and see if the pagination is working fine or not. I hope this should work if I'm not missing anything. So if you see here, right, let me try to, if you see here, right, now we are getting the pagination is working as expected. See, I'm scrolling down, the next set of requests is made. Limit is 25, starting this is 50, right? If I scroll more, the next set of record is 50. So this is how what I have done is, I've given an example as a Node API. No matter Node API or any custom REST endpoint that we are using in Visual Builder, we can very easily tweak the transform function code and we can implement the pagination feature, right? Accordingly, we also have to, okay, let me just quickly show you one more example here. If I have to implement the filtering, right, similar to the business object that we have seen, I'll just drag and drop the same input text component. And I'll just delete it. Nothing. I'll just use a single value here. Filter criteria. I'll just go to the filter criteria property of the SDP. I'll just maybe first name equals, and I'm expecting this value from the filter property. This is the same what we have done in our business object demo, right? So in business object, if I enter the first name, right, it was working fine. So let's try to see here if it is working fine or not in this scenario. If I just try to put the first name value here, and if I click on enter, nothing works out, right? The filter do not works out. The same problem that we have seen in case of paginate. Node is not able to understand how to send this request because Visual Builder internally will generate this query parameter for this filter in a different way. So we have to tell Node.js that we need to convert this one. So I have just written a filter transformation function we have bit more lines of code. So what I'll do is I'll just copy paste it here. And even the filter, I'll just quickly walk you through the code as well so that we can write the same for any API that we use. Right? So if I show you the skeleton code that is generated by Visual Builder is this, the filter function. However, this code will not work for our Node API, right? I'll just quickly copy paste the code that I have written here for the filter function. Just a second. So if you see, this is the filter code that I have written specific for my Node API, right? So my Node application accepts the query parameter in a different format. It's something like Q department name equals to this, and department ID equals to this, and so it represents the query parameter in a different way. So what I've done, I have written a custom filter function specific for my Node application, right? And I have to write this inside my filter function that gets generated. And this is a simple JavaScript code that I have written. And the configuration is something that this will be available as a, this will be passed as an argument to my filter function from the SDP. And this configuration contains the URL property. So this is the URL property where we have to append the Q parameter. So this is the Q parameter which I have generated using these lines of code, right? If required, I can share this code as well in the Node.js code as well. But this is just a simple JavaScript code that I have written to implement the filter features for my Node.js application. Now let me just quickly try to run this and see if my filter is working or not. Okay. So, to have to attach this value. If I put the first name value here, it should filter here, right? Again, might come this just a second. Let me yeah. So this filtering is working fine. It has filtered the first two of it is filtered based on the first name, right? So this is working as expected now. Okay. Let me quickly show you the sort function as well that we have implemented here. So even this sort function, like my Node API accept the sort uh, for sorting the values based on some column. They accept the data in some specific format. So this is the reason I have written the code for my Node API to handle this, to convert the request specific for my Node API based on this sort criteria that we are providing from our VB application. So it's something like this, for example, I'll just give you a quick example, right? In my Node application, what I do is I'll just check if the value is descending or ascending and the parameter, then I accordingly sort the value. So that's the reason what I do is, but Visual Builder, the inbuilt from the Visual Builder, we get the direction value is descending. So what I'm doing, I'm converting this into descending into DESC. So this kind of transformation we have to do because my node accepts the direction property as a DESC, but Visual Builder sends as a descending. This kind of transformation we have to do before sending the request to the actual endpoint, right? I also quickly wanted to show you one thing based on the response function. So what I have done here is just for this demo, right? I'll just quickly show it to you one use case here. Yeah. So if you see this, right, this higher date value, correct? This data is coming from my node application, right? But the date value that is getting returned here, if you see this higher date, right, it's coming as YYDDMN. Right? This is coming in my response. So, uh, but as per my like as per my use case, right, I should display data as YYYY DD, and format, right? So there are two ways. Either what I can do is I can write a transform function, and for this table, I can create a template, and I can use this uh, input date component, or I can write a custom JS code to convert the date in that specific format. And I have to do it if there are 10 tables in my application. I have to do it for each and every table, right? So what we can do is there is a much like real-time use case which I can provide here is there is something called as in the request transformation function, right? Sorry, in the response transformation function, we have this body, correct? So in this body, what I can do is I can this is a code that I've written for this demo. What I'm doing is if I'm checking if this type, right, if this value is of date type, then I am just converting, I'm calling this function and I'm just converting into a YYYYDDMM format. So with this code in place, if I try to run my application again, see, this is the date that it is converted into the specific format which I need. And I just have to do it once, and it will be taken care in all the application and in all the places where I need to display date in a particular format. So this gives me much more flexibility, and I just have one single line of code written which takes care of each and everything. So this is a benefit that we get with the request and the response transformation function, and we can do any kind of transformation for any API that comes to us, right? And we can leverage all the benefits of the SDP that is applicable, like filtering, sorting. I couldn't show the fetch by keys, but fetch by keys also we can write it, right? So what I suggest is see the sample code that gets generated by VB, and then based on any API, you can take any API and you can just try to tweak the sample code to map it to the endpoint that we'll be using it. And then we can leverage all the features of the SDP out of the box, right? Let me see if I have anything pending in my slides. Yeah, that's it. That's what I want to cover in today's session. If there are any questions.
Awesome. Yeah, if there's any questions that I haven't addressed, drop them in the QA. Awesome material as always. Amit's always a great speaker to have on. He's got a lot of really good stuff. To answer the number one question that I usually get when I'm doing stuff in the background, yes, I will be putting the recording of this session up on the office hours site, the same place you went in to sign up to get the emails for the sessions. The recording will be up there, and I will also include a link to a blog that Amit has recently updated showing some examples for the transform code. So once again, if there's any questions, now's the time. I'm not seeing any pop up, but join us next. It probably won't be a full month from now. I think we moved it ahead by a week or two. So check the office hour site to get the exact date, but join us for that. We'll be going over some of the 2510 release features for VBS and VB. With that, if you think of questions after the fact, there's a feature on the office hour site. You can send your questions through there, or you can always post them on our Cloud Customer Connect forum. With that, thank you, Amit. It's always a pleasure to have you on, and I always learn quite a bit, actually. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Glenn. It was really nice to have you all for this. Thank you.
Thanks. All right, we'll see you all next time. Thanks a lot.